This is Ayrton Senna, 3-time world champion, and according to many, the greatest racing driver who ever lived.
And the happiest man in Brazil must surely be Ayrton Senna.
This is Stirling Moss, no world championship, and yet Formula One itself called him the greatest driver never to win the title.
I suppose because I was brought up with fast cars, and I enjoyed being with them, not driving them because I hadn't driven them.
One defined greatness by winning everything, the other defined it without winning the one thing that's supposed to matter most. And that's exactly where things get dicey. Some lived up to the legend, some are more overrated than fans want to hear, and some were so good, even the results don't do them justice. So, how good are these F1 legends actually? Starting with the name that doesn't even feel like a name anymore. It feels like a warning. Ayrton Senna. 3 world championships, 41 race wins, 65 pole positions, and a yellow helmet that became one of the most recognizable images the sport has ever produced. Now, with most legends, the numbers tell the story. You read the resume, you understand the level, and you move on. But with Senna, the numbers don't explain it, not even close. Before anyone brings up the championships or the poles, they usually talk about the feeling, the intensity, the way the car looked like it was being dragged somewhere it had no business going. Qualifying laps that felt like a separate sport entirely, wet races where everyone else was managing survival and Senna was managing speed. Donington, 1993. He started 4th. By the end of the first lap, he had passed 4 cars and was leading the race. And it didn't look desperate or lucky. It looked inevitable. That was the thing about Senna. He was ruthless, he was obsessive, and no one understood that side of him more than Alain Prost. Senna believed every gap belonged to him, and if you were Prost, you were dealing with someone who had already turned the championship into a psychological war before the lights went out. So when people ask how good Ayrton Senna really was, the honest answer is this. He was exactly as good as the myth says. Not because he was perfect, but because the peak was that high. But if Senna was the myth, then Alain Prost was the problem with the myth. Because for every story about Senna being untouchable, unemotional, and almost supernatural behind the wheel, there was always one awkward little detail sitting right in the middle of it. Prost could beat him. Not always, though. But that is exactly why Prost's greatness is so easy to underrate. He didn't look like Senna. He didn't make the car dance in a way that made fans lose their minds. Prost was quieter than that, colder than that, more annoying than that. He was the kind of driver who could spend an entire race making it look like nothing dramatic was happening, and then you check the result, and he'd somehow won it. He'd managed the tyres, avoided the chaos, protected the car, and walked away with the points that actually mattered. That's why they called him the Professor, because he was fast enough to win and smart enough to not waste speed just to entertain you. 4 world championships, 51 Grand Prix wins, 106 podiums. By the time Prost retired, he had one of the most complete resumes the sport had ever seen, but his own style worked against his legacy. Fans love track drama, and Prost gave them control. You see, control is harder to romanticize. Make no mistake though, that control was deadly. So, how good was Alain Prost, really? He was good enough to make speed look boring. And I mean that as a compliment. Prost may never have had Senna's halo, but over a season, across a championship, when the points had to be counted and the mistakes had to be avoided, there weren't many drivers in history you would rather have had in the car. If Prost made greatness look calculated, Niki Lauda made it look almost uncomfortable. Mind you, Lauda wasn't trying to become a myth. He wasn't chasing the kind of dramatic legacy fans could attach a feeling to. He looked at Formula One, stripped away all the noise, and asked one question: what actually makes the car faster? And that is what made him scary. 3 World Championships across Ferrari and McLaren, a technical understanding of the car that made engineers value his feedback as much as his lap times. By the mid-1970s, he had Ferrari running like a dangerous machine. And then came the Nürburgring in 1976. The fire. 3rd-degree burns to his head. At that point, his career should have ended, but Lauda dusted it off and returned to the cockpit just weeks later. And dude wasn't even trying to prove a point. He came back still thinking like a championship contender. That is a completely different kind of mentality. Then, at Fuji, he pulled out. Conditions were too dangerous. He lost the title to James Hunt by half a point and didn't fall apart. He had already looked death in the face and knew exactly what this sport could take from a person. Lauda won the championship again the following year, then returned to McLaren years later and stole the 1984 title from Alain Prost by half a point at a stage of his career when most drivers were supposed to be fading. So, how good was Niki Lauda? Well, he is not the one whose highlight reels make you scream every 5 seconds, but Lauda's greatness was intelligence under pressure. And that brings us to Jackie Stewart, who proved that greatness isn't always about looking fearless. 3-time world champion. He could be fast without looking desperate, win without making everything feel like a war. That was his gift. But what really separates Stewart from the names around him on this list is not what he did inside the car, it's what he did outside it. Because back then, Formula One's relationship with danger was simple. You got in, you accepted the risk, and if something went wrong, people shrugged and called it a part of the sport. Drivers were expected to act like fear didn't exist. Stewart looked at that culture and argued drivers didn't need to flirt with the Grim Reaper every time they raced. And that was very brave, because it's one thing to drive fast, it is another to stand in front of the sport you've mastered and tell it that it is unnecessarily killing people. Mind you, Stewart wasn't an average driver. He was the current champion, winning races, beating the best drivers on the grid, and still saying this has to change. And when a champion says it, the sport has to listen. So, how good was Jackie Stewart, really? He was better than some people remember. Stewart wasn't an activist who happened to race. He was one of the best drivers in the world, and then he used that status to force Formula One to grow up. Some legends win championships. Jackie Stewart helped make sure more drivers actually lived long enough to win one. But then you have Gilles Villeneuve, and this is where the whole idea of Formula One greatness gets complicated. Because, judging by stats, Gilles has no business standing next to Senna, Prost, Lauda or Stewart. He never won a world championship. He won only 6 Grand Prix. 6. And his career was cut short before it could become what people hoped it would be. That should be the end of the conversation. Except it wasn't, because Gilles wasn't remembered because of the trophy cabinet, he was remembered because of the way he made people feel when he drove. And I know that sounds like fan talk, but with Gilles, the whole vibe was iconic. This was a driver whose legend was built almost entirely on feeling, the aggression, the car control, the way he could take a Ferrari that had no business being exciting and make every single lap feel like an event. Dijon 1979 is the race that explains him best. He didn't even win it, but his battle for René Arnoux for second place, touching wheels, swapping positions, running side by side through the closing laps, is still one of the most famous duels Formula One has ever produced. He didn't need to win to become the story. That was the power Gilles had. He helped Ferrari win the 1979 Constructors' Championship, finished second in the drivers' standings, and supported his teammate Jody Scheckter when the title fight demanded it. For a man that aggressive and that hungry, that loyalty said something real. So, how good was Gilles Villeneuve? He was not the greatest champion, but he made 6 wins feel immortal, and there are not many drivers in the sport's history who can say that. If you're enjoying this video, please remember to like, to subscribe, and to turn on that bell notification for more videos like this. Let's continue. While Gilles built a legend without the trophy, Stirling Moss built something even harder to explain. A reputation as one of the greatest drivers the sport has ever seen, without ever winning the Formula One World Championship. Not once. 16 Grand Prix wins, second in the World Championship 4 consecutive years from 1955 to 58, third for 3 years after that. He was always right there, and the title kept slipping away. Sometimes it was Fangio, sometimes reliability, sometimes just the brutal reality of racing in an era where being the best driver didn't always mean ending the year with the trophy. Moss isn't a legend because fans pitied him. He was legit one of the best. Good enough that the people who watched him, who raced against him, who competed in the same paddock, kept placing him alongside multiple world champions in the same breath. Across 466 major racing events in his career, he won 194 of them. His 1955 Mille Miglia victory is still one of the most celebrated drives in motorsport history. Now that is not a resume built on sympathy. For most drivers, no championship means the conversation ends. For Stirling Moss, no championship is where the conversation starts. And then you have Jim Clark, the driver people bring up when they want to make the entire GOAT debate feel genuinely uncomfortable. Because with Clark, the argument isn't about longevity, or the biggest brand, or the most dramatic personality. It's about purity. At his absolute peak, Jim Clark was the most naturally gifted racing driver Formula One has ever seen. 2 world championships, 1963 and 1965, and in that 1965 season, he also won the Indianapolis 500. That is a man operating on a completely different frequency from everyone around him. Clark drove like the car already understood what he wanted. He could take pole, lead from the front, control every phase of the race, and make everyone else look like they were competing in a different event. But his story is painful, because we never got the full version. He died at Hockenheim in 1968 during a Formula 2 race, and because his career ended that early, the question will always sit there. How much more was there? And then you have Juan Manuel Fangio, the man who makes every Formula 1 debate feel unfair, because with most of the legends on this list you can argue. Senna had the myth, Prost had the brain, Lauda had the steel, Gilles had the emotion, Moss the respect without the crown, Clark the pure natural gift. But Fangio? Fangio feels like the original final boss. 5 world championships, 7 full Formula 1 seasons, 4 different teams, and in 51 championship races, he took 24 wins, 29 pole positions, and 35 podiums. He was the definition of dominance, and he won with 4 different teams: Alfa Romeo, Maserati, Mercedes, Ferrari. Different cars, different politics, different problems, and the result kept looking the same. When a driver keeps moving and winning follows him around like a shadow, at some point you have to admit the common factor was him. The 1957 German Grand Prix at the Nürburgring is the race people always come back to. Fangio was in his 40s, a pit stop gone wrong, a massive gap to the Ferraris, and he decided the race wasn't over. He cut the lead lap after lap, broke the record again and again, and passed both Hawthorne and Collins to win and seal his 5th championship. So, how good was Juan Manuel Fangio really? Well, the result speaks for itself. His 5 titles stood as the record for nearly half a century. Schumacher didn't pass it until 2003. Speaking of Michael Schumacher, this legend pushed the goalpost a bit further. 7 world championships, 91 race wins, 2 championships with Benetton, 5 consecutive titles from 2000 to 2004 with the Reds. When Schumacher arrived at Ferrari, they hadn't won a drivers' championship since 1979. The team was a mess. Then he helped build the machine that later looked unstoppable. Schumacher, Ross Brawn, Jean Todt, Rory Byrne, Ferrari. That group created one of the most suffocating competitive structures the sport has ever seen. Schumacher could dominate from pole, turn strategy into trap, break teammates, extract performance from machinery that others couldn't touch. He raised the entire job description for what a Formula 1 champion was supposed to be. Before Schumacher, a great driver needed to be fast. After him, They needed to be fast, fit, political, technical, obsessive, and completely integrated into everything around them. But we can't talk about Schumacher honestly and pretend the legacy is clean. Adelaide 1944 with Damon Hill, Jerez 1997 with Villeneuve, Monaco 2006. To be honest, he wasn't free from controversies. But what's a great driver without a little sprinkle of drama? Another driver who brought Ferrari into the conversation was Fernando Alonso, a driver whose entire career feels like one long argument between talent and timing. 2 world championships, 32 race wins, more than 20 years in Formula One. But that summary almost feels like an insult, because Alonso is one of those rare drivers where the numbers tell you he was brilliant and still somehow fail to capture how good he actually was. He broke the Schumacher-Ferrari era. In 2005, at 24 years old, he became world champion with Renault and helped end the most dominant force the sport had seen in a generation. Then, in 2006, he did it again, back-to-back, against Ferrari, against Schumacher. That alone should have made his legacy simple. Then came McLaren in 2007, where his rookie teammate was Lewis Hamilton. After that, Alonso spent years at Ferrari dragging cars into championship fights they had no business being in, 2010, 2012. And to be honest, that 2012 season might be the clearest argument for his greatness. He finished without the 3rd championship most people thought he deserved. McLaren Honda became years of frustration instead of the comeback story it was supposed to be. And yet, rather than fade, he came back again. Reached 400 Formula One starts, was still standing on podiums at an age when most drivers are long retired. So, how good was Fernando Alonso, really? Hard truth is that he is way better than the results show. And then you have Sebastian Vettel, the 4-time world champion people somehow talk about like he accidentally wandered into greatness. 4 consecutive titles from 2010 to 2013, 53 Grand Prix wins, and a 2013 season that ended with 9 consecutive victories. 9 races in a row. That's basically a chokehold. But the criticism followed him everywhere. The car was too good. Red Bull gave him too much. Adrian Newey basically did the work. Anyone could have won in that thing. And look, yes, the Red Bulls were incredible, true, but incredible cars don't drive themselves to 4 straight championships. They don't produce that qualifying execution, that tyre management, that ability to lead from the front and slowly turn a race into a private event, where everyone else was fighting over the scraps. The car helped. Of course it did. Every legend on this list needed the car, but Vettel's problem was that his dominance looked too clean. And the better you do it, the more people act like it was easy. His Ferrari years complicated things. He made mistakes at key moments. The calm, front-running destroyer became a man trying to force a dream back into existence that wouldn't quite arrive. Germany, 2018. That image stuck. Fair or not, it became bigger than one race. But at his peak, at Red Bull from 2010 to 2013, Vettel was elite. And then you have Lewis Hamilton, the driver whose greatness somehow became harder to discuss the more he won. 7 world championships, more than 100 race wins, more than 100 pole positions, more than 200 podiums. I mean, it doesn't get better than this. But with Hamilton, the more he won, the more people reached for reasons to discount it. The car was too dominant, the hybrid era suited him, Mercedes did the real work, his teammates weren't strong enough. But here's where that argument doesn't make sense. Before Mercedes built the empire, Hamilton was already terrifying. In 2007, as a rookie, he went directly at Fernando Alonso, a reigning double world champion, from the very first race. That year, he went to the final race still in championship contention. In 2008, he won his first title at McLaren with a final lap overtake on the last corner of the last race that is still talked about as one of the most dramatic championship finishes in the sport's history. So no, Mercedes did not create Lewis Hamilton. Mercedes gave him the platform to turn the raw talent into numbers, and what he did with that platform was relentless. He beat Nico Rosberg in multiple title fights, then lost to him in 2016, then came back and won 4 consecutive championships from 2017 to 2020. And when the dominant car was gone and Max Verstappen showed up in a Red Bull breathing fire in 2021, Hamilton went to Abu Dhabi level on points in one of the most intense title battles the sport has produced in years. And then you have Max Verstappen, the one driver on this list whose story is still being written. With everyone else, we're mostly looking backward. Senna's legend is sealed, Prost's resume is sealed, Fangio's era is sealed, Schumacher's dynasty is sealed. But Max is the unfinished beast. He arrived in Formula 1 at 17 years old and looked like he had been doing this for a decade. By 18, he was the sport's youngest race winner, and from there, it just kept escalating. 4 world championships, a record 19 wins from 23 races in 2023. 19 wins in one season. The "it's just the car" argument follows Verstappen the same way it follows every dominant champion. And yes, Red Bull was exceptional. But the best car does not automatically produce that tyre control, that qualifying execution, that ability to turn a race into a private event and make the whole thing look inevitable by lap 10. Red Bull gave Max the car, and he locked in. We've seen wet weather Max, recovery drive Max, wheel-to-wheel Max. Now, with the car no longer clearly the class of the field, the next question is forming. What does Max look like when the sport pushes back? Schumacher had to build Ferrari before he could rule it. Hamilton had to fight through 2021 and the difficult years that followed. Alonso's whole reputation was built on dragging imperfect cars into impossible places. Max has already proven the dominance part. Now, we find out what he's made of when the dominance gets interrupted. Let us know in the comments which of these legends you think is most overrated, which one is the most underrated, and which one is truly the greatest of them all.